Hi, welcome to my channel. I still have yet to come up with an opening. Let me here move this over to the side and I'll just start recording. Today I want to talk about the image of God. A little preface to the story. I was watching the movie Oh God, 1970s something movie, I think 1970s, maybe 1980. Last week, and if you know the movie, it's with George Burns. Even if you don't know the movie, it's still with George Burns. Excuse me. And it's a story in which George Burns plays God, and he appears to a supermarket manager in California, and it's heartwarming. It's nice. It's a good movie, and there were two sequels. Oh God, Book 2, and Oh God, You Devil. And while I was watching it, I was thinking about the conception that's proposed, the conception of what God is like, the depiction of God in the Torah. If you don't know, the Torah is the 5 books of Moses. That's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And Moshe Kline, I've seen reference to him being Mel Klein, but I'll say Moshe Kline, published a book. It's also for sale, but his book is called Before Chapter and Verse. Basically, he proposes that there's an underlying structure of the Torah in, let me see, basically a cross interweaving with Leviticus in the middle, and Numbers, and then crossing it is, sorry, let me say that again. Genesis at the top, Leviticus, and then Numbers. And then going across is Exodus, Leviticus, again being in the middle, and Deuteronomy. And there are structural patterns that he noticed that fit together in this pattern. And so you have those 5 books arranged, and they're intricate patterns within each book that have this all fit together. So that's part of the book. It's part of the underlying structure that he proposes is in there, is in the Torah. He also identifies 2 primary names of the divine, of God. And these have been primary names that people have known for at least a century. You may know about the documentary hypothesis. What's that? Well, at some point, I'll say around 1900, something like that. I don't remember exactly. I think it goes a little bit further back, but basically somewhere in there. People noticed that there were 2 primary names of God in the actual Hebrew text of the Torah. One is Elohim, and the other is known as the Tetragrammaton, which essentially means 4 letters. That's the 4-letter name of God's sacred name. 4 letters of God's sacred name. These are the Hebrew letters Yud or Yod, He, Vav, He. And I'm going to talk about Kabbalah in a moment. That's a primary part of this discussion, this presentation. There are a lot of mystical meanings and explanations behind Yud, He, Vav, He. Hebrew in the Torah text is not presented with the vowels. However, there are indeed vowels when you pronounce them. Someone once said that the consonants are the body and the vowels are the soul. In other words, you can't have one without the other. However, all right, so okay, that gets into mystical aspects. Hebrew is typically written with only the consonants, and according to legend, God created the universe with the consonants. All right, that's not the subject of this presentation, however. So this book, Before Chapter and Verse, Oh, no, no. Let me go to the documentary hypothesis. Okay, so those are the two primary names of deity in the Torah. And there are parallel stories, or at least there seem to be moments when one name is used and then a different name is used. It switches back and forth. And so there was this theory called the documentary hypothesis, in which proposes that originally perhaps someone whose deity was Yud He Vav He. Again, you'd have to go further into research, but Nehemiah Gordon has found numerous examples in ancient texts where the vowels were included in. There are vowels. We're not sure. The academic mainstream consensus has not agreed as to the pronunciation, what the vowels are. So I will just refer to it as Yud He Vav He. But it's the divine, the personal name of God. So the documentary hypothesis proposed that Yud He Vav He, a follower of Yud He Vav He, wrote this text referring to God as Yud He Vav He. And then later on, and that would have been perhaps a Judah, in the southern part of Israel, in Judah. And then in the northern part, or at least another part where they recognized God as Elohim, there was a different writer that wrote stories referring to Elohim. And then there was a guest later on. There was an addition to the documentary hypothesis where someone proposed that there was a priestly author, because some of the Elohim stories, the stories referring to Elohim, were preoccupied with priestly things. So there was a guess that there was a priestly author that was different. So you have a priestly author, you have going kind of chronologically in terms of consensus, a Yahwistic or a Yud He Vav He writer, and then an Elohist writer of Elohim, and then a priestly writer who was also writing referring to Elohim. And then somebody proposed that Deuteronomy was written by a separate person. So then you had a Deuteronomy writer. So you have four writers, and then you had a redactor, editor, that pieced together all these different fragments together, and that's why you have stories that intersperse between both Yud He Vav He and Elohim. So that hit that hit academia, and that's been the prevailing understanding of the creation of the Torah. However, my personal study, my personal journey through understanding the Torah, one thing that just destroyed that entirely, I was studying it and I was following it along. One thing that destroyed that was, forgive me for the phone, hold on a second, I'll have to stop this for right now. So what really destroyed the documentary hypothesis, in my sense, was that both terms for God were used in the equidistant letter sequence code. So there are 5 books of Moses. At the beginning of each line, or the beginning line of each book has, at a 49-letter sequence, spells out Torah in Genesis and Exodus, and then in Numbers and Deuteronomy it spells out Torah backwards, the beginning line of each of the books. So it creates a chiasm. So Leviticus is in the middle, you have Genesis and Exodus, and you have Numbers and Deuteronomy, You have Leviticus in the middle. At a 49-letter skip pattern, beginning of Genesis spells out Torah, and then the letters spell out Torah, and then same thing with Exodus, and then Leviticus has Yud He Vav He at a 7-letter skip sequence, and then Numbers has Torah spelled backwards, so it mirrors Exodus, and then at a 48-letter skip sequence, Deuteronomy has Torah spelled backwards that mirrors Genesis. So it's what's called a chiasmus in literary poetic terms. The literary poetic term for this kind of mirroring effect or structuring effect is a chiasmus. All right, so anyway, trust me, I will get to my presentation soon. So that sequence is structural, and it's referring to both names. So clearly the writer was using both names, so it could not have been a separate writer adding on to an earlier writer's work. So I will leave that for a different discussion. Okay, so back to the book before chapter and verse, which you can find on the internet. I found it at chaver.com, chaver.com. It's written by Moshe Kline. And so he proposes and illustrates that there are two primary names, and it was structurally that way. So because it's not that there were two different writers, it's because there are two different facets of the deity in the Torah. Yud He Vav He is the one in the heavens. That's why when you sacrifice, you make a burnt sacrifice, it refers to the odor going up to Yud He Vav He in the heavens. And the commandments that he gives and the preoccupation that he has seems to be in terms of the mind and in terms of oneself. Meanwhile, Elohim is on the surface, concerned with mundane matters like procreation and, I would say, the more physical aspects of the universe. So it's not that there are two different deities, it's that there's one deity but two facets. For those of you who are familiar with the Transformers cartoon, I think of the quintessons. It's one being. A quintesson is one being but with five faces, and they switch around. Each face has a different personality. I think of it more like that. So two facets but one deity. So, and there's only one spot in the entire Torah where you see both names together as one entity, and that's in the Garden of Eden story. In English translations, it's the Lord God. So if you're reading an English translation, the Lord God just goes, the fact that there are two different names goes right by you. But in Hebrew, it's very clear. It's Yud He Vav He Elohim. It's the only time you see both names together as one. It's also a story about splitting off. You have Adam and Eve splitting off from the Garden of Eden. You have numerous examples of splits. So I think that was intentional. Okay, now getting back to the main part of my presentation, the nature of God. So I was watching Oh God with George Burns movie, and I was contemplating the nature of God in the Torah by this author or authors working in concert. That's what I suspect, that there were several authors, but it was one authorial writing effort. It wasn't just a hodgepodge of different texts collected together. So I was also thinking about Kabbalah, which is what these notes are about. Now, Kabbalah, it's interesting. How far back does Kabbalah go? That's a whole other discussion, but at least 2,000 years ago, an early text, the earliest text that we know of is, mainstream considered Kabbalah, is the Sefer Yetzirah, and I won't go into it, but there had been a series of or there had been what I would call like an evolution of texts, or there are various texts written. I'll put it this way: there are several texts written over time. It's not that it's a sequence, a planned sequence. It's more like there are writings or texts, Kabbalistic texts written over time, and so you have somewhat different depictions of the nature of the universe. Kabbalah is a collective term for texts which are mystical and sacred, but mystical that explain the universe and the nature of the universe, and explain the nature of divinity and God, and the two intermesh together, relationships and so forth. And it takes a lot of study, a lot of understanding, a lot of knowledge to be able to understand these texts. And that's what fascinates me. So, all right, so the earlier texts referred to Sefirot, or things, collection of 10 of things, each one having a different trait. And so later on, other texts evolved into more like a collection of 10. You could get into possibly origins in Pythagoras, and secret sects, secret mystery schools. Isaac Luria, born 1534, died 1572. His big thing was about reconciliation, about trying to repair the world, known in Hebrew as Tikkun Olam, repair the world. And so he explained how these 10 different parts work together in unison. So this is the Kabbalistic nature of God, the nature of God understood in Kabbalah, at least part of it. There are 3 heads. All right, so you can imagine it in terms of the human body. There are what are called Sefirot. I'll call them just simply vessels. There's a vessel at the top called Keter. Keter could mean 3 different things, and that's how you get the 3 different heads. I'll get to that in a moment. So below Keter, you have one vessel, which is Chokmah and Bina. Well, actually, Chokmah and Bina, that's the mental level, the conscious mental level, the conscious intellect. And then below that is Da'at, which would be knowledge. Then below that is the emotion level. You have a vessel, Chesed and Gevurah. And then below that, right about where the heart is, you have a vessel that links these 2 emotional vessels with the vessels in the legs, which relate to interaction with the rest of the world. And in terms of the 2 vessels that interact with the rest of the world, one is Netzach, which means endurance, actually means victory, but it has a connotation of endurance, struggling through, putting forth effort. And the other one is Hod, which means awe. Refers to, you could translate in different ways, but a lot of people, the impression is one of like awe. So below that you have the genitalia vessel, which is Yesod, which would be foundation. And below that you have a single vessel, which is Malchut, which literally means kingdom. So you can picture this as a human form. Now, this is rapidly getting into what Isaac Luria contributed, his interpretation of these different vessels. He explained that, or it's explained. I'll give you Kabbalah. Not sure whether, I think he explained it, but I'll explain the Kabbalah itself. The 3 heads at the top, the highest head takes the term for Keter to wait. The meaning of Keter meaning wait, as in waiting for, and that refers to faith. And then the inner part of going to the second head, that's referring to the crown meaning of Keter, and it's known as the head of nothingness. The earlier head I was talking about was the unknowable head. This is the head of nothingness, and there's explanations to why it's called the head of nothingness. And it's the innermost head. It embodies pleasure. So you have faith at the top, you have pleasure, and then the elongated face, the outermost, that's the innermost face. The outermost head is called the long face. It's elongated. It takes the meaning of Keter, that means surround, to surround, and it's known as the outer head. So, and that deals with will, ratzon in Hebrew. So you have pleasure as the inner head directing the outer head, which would be will or desire. You're going in a certain direction. The pleasure is steering you in a certain direction. So then that's Keter. Then below that you have as I said before, you have the conscious intellect. You have male and female. You have some of these Sefirot vessels are male, others are female. In terms of how the light channels through, a male Sephirah, male vessel, will project the light, and a female vessel will receive the light, and then I'll say incubate it, and then project it further down. Excuse me. So Isaac Luria described how these could be interworking together by means of facets or partsufim. So at the top, you have the three heads. Below that, you have Chokmah, which is intellect. That's also known as the father or Israel, the elder. And then that's the I would call inspiration, a flash of insight. And then Bina is understanding. That's the female part receiving that flash, and the female has to give structure to it. And another nickname for Bina is mother. So in terms of what Isaac Luria was talking about, these facets, these anthropomorphic facets, you have the father, which is also known as Israel the elder, and then you have mother, which is also known as Tuvuna, compassion, I think is what Tuvuna, if I remember correctly, what Tuvuna means. But Mother Bina is taking the light from Father Chokmah and giving it form, and then it gestates, and then the Son is the combination of the bottom Sefirot, with exception of Malchut. So you have, as the Son, you have Chesed, which is male. You have two columns. The Sefirot on one side is male. The other column of Sefirot is female. So you have Chesed, which is altruism. It's been translated as loving kindness. It's outpouring. The general idea is it's male. It's giving out. And Gevura is female. On its counterpart is female. It receives, and it's restrictive in the sense that it's, I guess the good term would be semi-permeable. It's careful not to let go through too much. It restricts and regulates what passes through. so that, and that's very important, so that the entire structure isn't overwhelmed and isn't, something doesn't overpower and crack the entire thing, because that's what Isaac Luria was concerned about and was writing about in terms of repairing the world. There was an earlier era of chaos, or world of chaos, and then this is a world of repair. So Gevurah is very important in terms of restricting what goes through, so it doesn't overpower and shatter the rest of it. Talking about the light. So then below that you have, in the heart area, you have Tiferet, which is translated as beauty, and then Netzach and Hod and Yesod, the genitals. So those 6 are the sun. You mean like as in father and son. So you have up here, you have Keter with the 3 heads, and then below that you have, on the conscious intellect level, you have Chokmah, which would be the father, and Bina, which would be the mother, and then the light from Chokmah, well actually from up in Keter, goes down to Chokmah, and then to Bina, and then down to the sun, which is the small face, which encompasses all the 6 lower Sefirot. And small face, also known as the sun, S-O-N, small face is the smaller form. You may remember that I referred to Keter at the top as having 3 heads. One of the 3 heads, the outermost of the 3 heads, is known as elongated or long face. I also forgot to mention that amongst the 3 heads, the unknown male, and you have the head of nothingness. Make sure, two identities. I'm still recording. One is known as Israel, and that's the name of it that's looking upward. And Jacob is the one that is looking toward what I would call the mundane plane, or it's looking straight ahead or looking down. So one is looking up, one is looking down. Those of you who know your Bible may recognize Israel and Jacob. So that's the same character in the Torah. It switches back and forth. So in Lurianic version of Kabbalah, Israel is the form of it, the persona of it that's looking upward, and the other is the one that's looking down. Good, I'm still recording. And then Malkut at the bottom of son, S-O-N, is daughter, and that has 2 wives' names, Leah and Rachel, or Rachel. Malkut, by the way, means kingdom. So that's a very, very brief explanation of this setup. So that seems very different from, and please believe me, rest assured, thanks for being patient. I'm getting towards the end of this presentation. Very different from the model of God in the Torah, literally in the Torah, if Moshe Kline is correct. So how do we reconcile them? Are they part and parcel of the same thing? Or is the correct way of viewing God in the Torah that 2-facet type, where you have YHVH in the heavens and Elohim in the mundane earth, and the 2 combined are one? Those are 2 facets of one deity. You also have references in the Torah that could jibe, or do seem to jibe, with this Kabbalistic form of deity. I am inclined to think, I'm persuaded to think that this Kabbalistic form evolved over time during the Middle Ages and so forth, and that the original was actually what Moshe Kline was describing in his book. So I wondered what you think. And thank you again for struggling through this. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to give a presentation like this because there's so much involved, and I tend to, when I'm talking to people explaining these things in depth, I have tended to, just from experience, be concerned that I'm losing the audience or I'm losing the other person. I could be talking about something very complex and very detailed, but the topics that I talk about are very detailed, and they're intricate, and that's what fascinates me. That's why I'm so passionate. I want to share these things with you. So, in terms of the future of my channel, I'm between jobs right now. I'm trying to drum up interviews. I have at least one tomorrow, and I have a buy a coffee account that uses a separate bank account, so I'm not commingling funds, but I would appreciate if you could donate to it. I'll leave a link. I'll remember to leave a link below in the description, and I want to get a microphone, an actual studio microphone, because the audio here might be not that great from what I've heard, and I just want to get better equipment, better production value. All right, I'll talk with you later. So long.